Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. This week in the video I want to talk about those of us who go armed out in society. You know, most of the time we're out there, our primary goal of concealed carry is to protect ourselves, our family, and perhaps some people who might be in our immediate vicinity should some kind of an attack take place. But what we're finding is that in a lot of cases, people with concealed carry are stopping active shooter attacks. Now, the FBI has kept statistics on this, and depending on who you want to read, apparently they've been downplaying the role of citizens in stopping these active shooter attacks. Part of it comes across by, how you define these things. An active shooter attack, which is not always shooting in the first place. In some cases, it's cutting weapons. In some cases, it's people driving into a crowd with a vehicle. But the point is, their goal is to attack a lot of innocent people and kill or injure a lot of innocent people. Now, they may have one or two people they want to target to begin with, but once they've accomplished that, then they'll just go random and hurt a lot of people. But research outside of the FBI says that while the FBI completely downplays and say citizens very, very rarely stop these active shooter events, one particular research project says the majority of stops of active shooter events come from the actions of you and I, honest citizens out there carrying concealed weapons. Stick around. Let's talk about this. Now, the research I tend to believe is not the FBI. We have seen, for a lot of reasons, that those folks just haven't been telling the truth over the last couple decades. There's an organization called the Crime Prevention Research Center, and it's run by Dr. John Lott Jr. He was an economist. And interestingly, very early in his career, he was kind of an anti-gun guy. He didn't really think guns were a positive factor. But he approached the research of this sort of stuff from an open mind. And what he learned pretty quickly was more armed citizens equals a safer environment. And at one point, he even worked for the U.S. Department of Justice under the Trump's first administration. And during his stay there, his research proved that what the FBI was publishing, how often an active shooter incident was stopped by a citizen, he proved that those numbers were very wrong. And he submitted to the FBI not only the fact that their info was wrong, but how he knew it was wrong and what they needed to do to correct it. And they didn't correct it. Now, he's no longer with the Department of Justice. He's now formed this Crime Prevention Research Center. But that's the data I'm going to use to talk about today. In a report published by that Crime Prevention Research Center, over a 10-year period from 2014 to 2023, they come up with 180 active shooter attacks which were stopped by citizens carrying concealed weapons. 51.5%, according to them, that occurred in non-gun-free zones. In other words, where these people could legally carry their weapons. They stopped active shooter events more than half the time. Now, if you look overall, including those gun-free zones where citizens could not legally carry, their stop rate is still at about 35% overall. But in the areas where they could carry, they stopped more active shooter events than the police. That's a pretty dramatic finding, because the FBI claims overall, so looking at the 35% overall number that the other research came up with, The FBI claims only 4% were stopped. So from 4 to 35% is not just a calculation error. As far as I'm concerned, that's a deliberate attempt to downplay the effectiveness of concealed carry people and downplay the effect of legally carried guns in society. But that's what the FBI and that's what their lackeys in the mainstream media are putting out to the public. That you and I carrying a gun out there is not really going to have an effect on how many people might be killed in an active shooter event. And it's a lie. Now, I said that the CPRC said that 51.5% of these incidents in non-gun-free zones were stopped by civilians. According to their research, 44.6% were stopped by the police. So the police were stopping less of these than citizens. And what's the differences between the FBI numbers and the other research? Well, a lot of it is the definition of an active shooter attack. The FBI puts a number on it. If this many people were shot or killed, then that makes it an active shooter attack. But there are examples where the active shooter was stopped before they could even fire a shot. So those preemptive stops are not in the FBI records, but they are a legitimate stop of an active shooter attack. So it's the way we define things that allow them to claim these numbers are accurate, but they're really not accurate. Now, things we need to consider. Active shooter events are extremely dangerous events, both for citizens who might decide to get involved and try to stop the shooter, as well as police who are responding. It's much more dangerous for the police than it is for armed citizens. In one case, someone with a concealed carry weapon who attempted to stop an active shooter event actually shot a bystander by mistake. One case, that's just about 0.6%. So less than 1% of the cases, the concealed carry folks shot the wrong person. The same number, one of those events, they had their gun taken away from them. So 0.6%, less than 1% of the cases, the armed citizen was disarmed in the process of trying to stop the active shooter event. In 2 cases, the concealed carrier was killed. As I said, these are dangerous events. So in 2 of these cases, when an honest citizen tried to stop an active killing, they failed not only to stop the killing, but they were killed themselves in the process. So the idea that Joe Citizen or retired cop who's carrying a concealed weapon is going to go into this and always win, it's not 100%, but only about 1% of the cases was that citizen killed. Unfortunately, in 44 of those cases, so about 24% of the time, they were injured. So as an honest citizen who decides to get involved, try to stop an active shooter attack, there's a 25% chance that you're going to be killed or injured in the process. That's a risk you take to go outside of your own bubble and just protect you and your immediate family, so to speak. Now, 27 law enforcement officers were killed in 19 of the cases where they got involved. That's about 6.5%. So law enforcement being killed is a higher percentage, 6.5 as opposed to 1. 100 law enforcement officers were injured in their response to active shooter events. That's 48 cases. That's about 28.8%. So it is more dangerous for the police to go try to stop these things than it is for the armed citizen. Now that's a little counterintuitive to think that roughly 35% of the police officers are going to be killed or injured responding to these things, as opposed to 25% of citizens being killed or injured trying to stop the killing. But I think it actually makes sense. You know, we can assume that police officers are probably better armed. We can assume that they may be better trained, and most of them in this country have specifically been trained how to respond to an active shooter event. Now, in the early days of that training, they were taught to form teams and go in as a 4 or 5 member contact team to deal with active shooters. And their risk level goes way, way down when they're working in that team formation. But what we found early on was that waiting to form a team generally cost a lot of innocent lives. So most agencies are now training their people to go immediately upon arrival. Maybe a solo officer is going to respond, but they will try to form a team as more officers arrive on the scene. So in many cases nowadays, it is one officer against the active shooter as opposed to a team of 4 or 5. So even though they may be better trained, even though they may be better armed, the active shooters expect a police response. And in the vast majority of these cases, the police response is going to be by uniformed officers, which are very clearly going to be identified by the active shooters. Other factors why there is a higher death or injury rate for law enforcement officers is in several of the latest active shooter events, they have been pre-planning for the police response to the point that they are prepared to ambush those officers on arrival. They will go in, they will do some initial shooting. They have pre-planned their event. A lot of times they will physically go to the scene, look around, even diagram out a plan. And they anticipate the most likely avenue of response for police officers. So they may go in, do some initial killing, and then go to a point where they can cover that approach by the police and actually ambush them as they arrive and get out of their cars. So that factors into that 35 to 25 difference as well. Concealed carry holders have 2 major advantages in being able to stop active shooter events. They're probably not as well trained as the police. They're probably not as well armed as the police, but they are there when it happens. They are what, in the 911 report talking about who rescued so many people out of the Twin Towers in New York City, in that book they used the phrase first responders. We think of first responders as being police, fire, emergency medical. But they said, really the first responders are those people, citizens, who are there when the situation happens. So the advantage they have is they are there when it happens, and they probably have more intimate knowledge of how it happened and what's going on there. Plus, they have the element of surprise if they're carrying concealed. Now, this will generate a lot of feedback from those out there in the open carry community. But I think in this active shooter type event, this is particularly a bad type of event for you to be open carrying. These people are alert. They have pre-planned their attack. If they come in and they see a citizen there with a pistol on their hip, who do you think they're going to shoot first? But if I am there with a pistol in my pocket or under a vest and I'm well concealed, they don't know that I'm any different than the rest of the citizens, the rest of the victims there that they're going to try to attack. Yet I can suddenly move from victim to attacker myself and turn it around on these people by surprise. That is a huge factor in making citizens as effective or more effective than uniformed police officers. Now, while these concealed carry holders shot the wrong person in one case, law enforcement officers shot the wrong people in 4 cases, 4 times as many. And the really sad fact is 2 of those 4 were blue on blue. So half of the people that they shot incorrectly were other officers. Crossfire situations, misidentification, bad light, we don't know all the factors. And that's still very, very low. Still, only about 1% of the situations where police officers stopped an active shooter event did they shoot the wrong person. So the incidence is extremely low. In a horrible, confusing event like that, I think a 1% error rate is phenomenally good, not bad. So what do the police think about armed citizens out there and their chances for stopping active shooter events and saving lives? I wrote for Police One website for a number of years. I quit writing for them in about 23, I believe. In 2013, when I was still one of the top 4 or 5 writers for Police One, they did a poll, a survey. And at the time, they had about 450,000 members of Police One. And in order to be a member of Police One, have access to their articles, you had to be either an active or a retired law enforcement officer and be able to submit credentials to prove that. 450,000 working and retired cops in this survey. 86% of them felt that casualties could be reduced or even completely eliminated by citizens with concealed carry weapons in locations where it was legal for them to carry. 86% of the cops thought concealed carry where it was legal was a good idea and was a positive factor in likely saving a lot of lives in these kind of attacks. 77% of those officers supported arming voluntary teachers and administrators in schools to be able to carry, because we know a lot of these shootings over the years have occurred in school situations, which generally have no guns at all unless they have school resource officers. And in one very large notable problem in Uvalde, Texas, they not only had school resource officers, they had a school police department, and they oversaw one of the absolute most terrible responses by the police in any active shooter situation in this country so far. Their response was negligent at best, and the situation went on far, far longer than it should have. So here's a question for you. If you are a retired police officer who routinely carries in society, if you are a concealed carry holder, permit holder who carries under that, if you are in a state that allows constitutional carry and you are carrying at the mall, at a school event where that is legal, at gatherings of people, and some sort of active shooter event occurs, are you willing to act to save the lives of people you don't even know? Now, you are under no obligation to do that. If you carry a concealed weapon, as I said, it is generally your goal to protect yourself and your family and maybe people who are in your immediate environment. But if you're at a large shopping complex and you hear shots being fired a ways away, the shooting continues, screaming, panicked people come running your direction, so you know there's something terrible going on down there. Are you willing to move to the sound of the guns and try to save lives? There's no right or wrong answer. As I said, you have no obligation to do that, but I think a lot of us, just because of the kind of people we are, would be willing to do that, especially retired cops. I mean, once a cop, always a cop. Now, there are active cops who don't have the wherewithal to go stop one of these situations now. They shouldn't be cops, in my opinion. And so when they're retired, if they carry at all, they're probably not going to be the kind of people who would go try to save lives. On the flip side, there are a lot of concealed carry holders out there who would. A lot of them are veterans. And they're going to bring that military mindset and that military skill set with them. So there are a lot of people in our society, legally armed by whatever means, that if they hear a situation like this happen, they're probably going to try to intervene. They're probably going to try to save lives. But the time to make that decision, whether or not you would get involved, the time to make that decision is now. Not when you hear it happen and you're surprised by it. Think through the kind of situations where you would be willing to do that and pre-make that decision now, so that when it happens, instead of saying, "Oh my God," you say, "Well, I thought this could possibly happen someday, and I know what I'm going to do about it." So we have who knows how many, but I would venture to say in any given state there are several thousand people who carry legally every day. Now that varies by state, obviously. In Wyoming and Texas, a lot of people are armed. In California and New York and New Jersey, a lot fewer people are armed. But even in this incredibly blue state of Illinois, which is getting worse by the day, concealed carry permits are available, there are a lot of them out there. How many of these people carry every day? Don't know. How many of these people would be willing to get involved in an active shooter situation? Don't know. But I would venture to say there's probably a couple 100,000 potential armed people out there to stop these active shooter events. What if active and retired senior military personnel, what if they had the same LEOSA, Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, what if they had those same kind of rights to carry off-duty in society? How many more protectors, sheepdogs, would that put out in society and increase the odds that someone could be there to stop an active shooter attack if it happened? Now, military police officers, 10 or more years of military police type experience in their military records, they qualify under that Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, and so they can carry. I have a nephew, retired Navy Master Chief, most of that time spent as Master at Arms. He has LEOSA rights to carry 24/7 nationwide, just as I do. But what if we expanded that to say you don't have to have law enforcement background, but if you're an active or retired, say E6 or above, and officers, you have the right to carry under these laws. Now, they are not necessarily up to speed on civilian laws dealing with the use of deadly force. So if they're not military police officers, then I think they need at least a modicum of training to bring them up to speed on when you can legally shoot, when you can't, things of that sort. So they need kind of concealed carry type experience and training, in my view, to do that effectively. But it wouldn't amount to much, and I think a very large percentage of them would be willing to go through that training to get that right. Now, if you want to look at definitions, by definition, most of the active shooter attacks we've seen in this country since, we'll say since Columbine school attack, would fit into the category of domestic terrorism. But we know in the last 4 years under the Biden administration, thousands upon thousands of bad people came into our country illegally, mostly across the southern border. We know that a lot of people on the terrorism watch list came in. We know that as many as 50 to 80,000 military-age single male Chinese people came in. What if they're not here for our country's health? What if they are here to try to start causing attacks and disrupting our society? So in other words, what happens if this shifts from some idiot, and you know, though it's not politically correct, most of the most recent active shooter events have been committed by trans people. So what if this is not just our domestic crazy people committing these active shooter events? What if it's actually international terrorists who come here maybe with training, maybe with better armament, and maybe working in teams? What's that going to do to change these situations? A lot. It's going to make them incredibly more dangerous for whoever tries to stop them, citizen or uniformed cop. As a citizen, if you make that decision that you're going to step over that line, if I hear shots being fired at the food court in the mall, like Elisha Dickens did in Indiana a couple of years ago, if you decide, if that happens, I'm going to go try to stop it, what tactical steps should you take to try to be more effective in stopping an active shooter attack? And as I mentioned, I think the number one item is to carry concealed, not openly. That gives you the element of surprise. It's going to help you live a little bit longer when that attack starts. I think it's the number one factor. When this happens, you want to temper your response. When I thought this through, I was going to use the word slow your response. I don't know that you want to slow it, but you want to temper it until you can get clear thought process going. You need extreme situational awareness if you're going to go into an active shooter attack. You need to approach this person or these persons if there are multiple shooters, and multiple shooters are extremely rare in U.S. history. You need to approach them from the rear or from the side. You need to be alert for other attackers. If you see one, expect that there could be a second or third. Another factor you have to be cognizant of is you might not be the only person there with a concealed weapon who is going to try to stop this attack. So if two of you get involved, you have an identification problem between yourselves to understand if that other guy is good or bad. It's going to complicate things. I'm not aware of that happening in a U.S. situation, but it's bound to happen someday that more than one potential responder is going to get there and try to stop that shooting. When you are ready, when you have established a tactical situation where you're ready to engage this person, this is not the time for warnings. This is not the time for verbal challenges. This is the time for surprise and violence of attack. In other words, while you are shooting in defense of life, you're going to have to shift from a defensive to an offensive footing. Once you make the decision to go after this active shooter and try to put them down, then you attack them as fast and as violently as you can. And you fire for effect. You don't fire to get a hit. You fire to drive them down to the ground and stop them. Deny their ability to hurt anyone else. If that means killing them outright with a headshot, then you do what you have to do. If you're going to step over that line and try to stop this killing, then you stop the killing. Make sure they're down for the count. Disarm them. Stay alert for other potential attackers who may be a slight distance away, but upon you taking out the primary shooter, now they may try to target you. Once you've got them down and stopped their active killing, now is the time to issue orders. Tell others to call 911. Tell them to describe you to dispatch and to identify you as the good guy. This is the guy who stopped the killing. He's wearing a blue shirt, blue jeans, and he has maybe a yellow ball cap on. Instruct others to start treating the people who are hurt. Tactical combat casualty care. They're not going to be trained in it. They're probably not going to have the tourniquets, the battle dressings, and the things they need. But the point is, your job is to make sure bad guy doesn't get back up and go active again. You concentrate on that. Tell other people to start treating those around them who may be injured the best they can. You need to prepare for police arrival. When these situations happen, the call will go out, 911 will be notified, the police will be responding, we assume correctly and enthusiastically, and they're going to come in like thunder. They will not know when they get there who the good guys are and the bad guys are, most likely. So you need to holster or ground your pistol as soon as you can. If the guy's not dead, you're holding him at gunpoint to keep him from endangering anyone else, and you feel you have to maintain that status until the police can take over, then do what you need to do. But understand when the cops get there, if you're pointing a gun at someone, there's a distinct chance they may fall into that shoot the wrong person category and engage you. I'm not saying the cops are bad people. I'm not saying they're going to do the wrong things. I'm saying this is a horribly complex and confusing incident, and mistakes happen. So you need to become a non-threat to those arriving officers, as much as you possibly can. Hands in the air. I'm the good guy. I shot the bad guy. Burn through their fog of battle and help them understand what's going on. Most importantly, you need to comply with all police orders. If that includes throwing your gun down, getting on the ground, being handcuffed, even being arrested and transported to the police station, comply with what they tell you to do. Arguing with them, resisting them with them, is not going to make things better. Comply, don't get hurt. We'll sort these things out as time goes on. You need to invoke your concealed carry insurance program or your legal team that you have arranged for as soon as possible. I did a whole nother video on whether or not you should talk to the police after a shooting. There's two schools of thought on that, and the two sides will probably never completely agree. I recommend that you provide enough information to the arriving officers to let them get a good understanding of what happened and what your part was in this incident. In other words, give them what is essential to the initial police investigation. Once you've done that, then say, Okay, I think at this point I'm going to invoke the Fifth Amendment. I'm going to remain silent until my legal counsel is available. I have nothing more to say. I will not answer any further questions. But give them enough to help them start to sort out what happened in this horrible situation. Now the question comes up, if I'm 100 yards down the mall and I hear shooting in the food court, but I turn and go to the scene, I have no police powers. Concealed citizens, constitutional carry folks, you have no police powers. You have no authority to go intervene in this situation. So the question will come up, are you legally justified in running to the sound of the guns? Whether or not you're legally justified, I think if you do that and someone feels it was wrong, like a prosecutor, really about the only thing they could accuse you of is poor decision making. You didn't do anything illegal by running to try to help people who are probably being hurt. And once you get into that danger zone, whether you went there on purpose or you just stumbled into it, you are now in danger. And at that point, you are legally justified in defending yourself and defending people around you. So as I said, this is a decision that you have to make. Make it now. Don't wait until it happens. Now what happens if you don't run to the sound of the guns? You hear it going on, you are armed, you have some shooting skills, but you choose not to get involved. And as I said, you have no legal obligation to get involved. If you choose not to, and this comes back to remembering what Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman said, and I've heard him say it a number of times in his Bulletproof Mind presentation that he gives to police officers. He said, if you have the arms and the skills to save a life in a situation like this and you choose not to, then you have made a decision that you're going to have to live with the rest of your life. You're going to have to live with the idea that, I might have been able to change the outcome of that. I might have been able to save some people's lives, and I didn't. Now, if you make the decision not to get involved in one of these, and you're okay with that, then you can live with that decision. But I think a lot of us couldn't live with that decision, couldn't live with the fact that we didn't try to help. That's a call that only you can make. Now, we feared violent unrest in 2024 prior to the election. And I did some videos along that way. And I'm happy that I was wrong. I'm happy that the violence did not come in 2024 the way we saw it in 2020 prior to that election. But now that Trump has been elected and is in office, and his actions are not sitting well with the people who didn't win, with the leftist side of our society. His deportation of illegal people, including illegal violent criminals from MS-13 and Tren de Aragua. I probably don't say that correctly. The idea of Elon Musk heading Doge and finding not billions, but eventually probably trillions of dollars, not just in waste and fraud, but I think we're going to find they're going to uncover outright criminal theft of federal monies by Democrats. The Democratic Party, and I know this from growing up in Illinois, where the Democratic Party has controlled the state for decades, the Democratic Party is rooted in corruption. They have been taking care of themselves financially with the people's money for decades. I think that's going to be uncovered. I think that's why they are resisting Doge's efforts so much. And they have got Antifa and BLM and other leftist activists fired up to fight back. I'm filming this April 4. Tomorrow, April 5, there's supposed to be a nationwide day of violence, I guess, by Antifa, BLM, and other groups to protest what the president is trying to change, how he is trying to restructure our country and bring it back to normalcy. So we may see the violence that some of us predicted for last year, we may see it grow ever worse this year. So I guess what I'm saying is I think that the chance for active shooter attacks is probably higher now, not lower. Despite the FBI and media claims, concealed carry folks out there have stopped the majority of active shooter attacks in the past in those locations where they could legally carry. And we are likely to do the same in the future. So think things through. Discuss them with your family. Make your decision now. What will I do if I find myself near one of these active shooter attacks or in the core of it? Train with your partner, your spouse, your older than teenage children. Learn how to work as a team, because if two of you are armed and willing and able to attack an active shooter, then you have become way more powerful than any single responder. That makes it safer for all of you, and it makes it much more effective in terms of stopping the killing. So think about your little personal team that you could train and have prepared. Most of all, no matter what we face in this country. And I think from what I've seen in 3 months now of our new president being in charge, I think the future of this country is bright. We may indeed be seeing the beginning of the new golden age of the United States of America. Whatever you choose to do, be safe out there, folks. Thank you for watching these videos. If you think they are worthwhile, I ask you to subscribe or resubscribe as needed. Give me a thumbs up. And as I said, most of all, y'all be safe out there. Thank you. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah. That's all there is till next time.